Okay. I've reprogrammed it to take out those amphibian monstrosities instead.
He's not my favorite choice for a bodyguard, but oh well.
No need to worry. He knows who his masters are. There is nothing to...
Don't you trust me?
No!
It's finally over.
U.S. safety regulations. The city has been...
After getting impaled and left for dead, Wesker is revived by the virus. He isn't turned into some creepy abomination, nor does he receive long flowing anime hair. He talks to a computer calling itself the Red Queen because it was in that one movie, you know, where the random fan insert character beats Nemesis in hand-to-hand combat? Nah, Jill. Hollywood says you didn't do that. She did that.
Remember,
Wesker punches it in the face and makes his getaway as the mansion counts down to an explosion. While our B-list horror pro tags fly off into the sunset, Wesker repeatedly shoots a cripple throughout the mansion. He finally gets her with the old rooftop chandelier gag. He then dashes off into the rising sun, declaring he no longer needs Umbrella. Exactly 2 months later, on the 24th of September in 1998, we turn our sights from the hillside mansion to the city about to be Harlem struggled into oblivion. A city which would soon set the standard for the term depraved bukkake. Our story continues here, in this city, following a series of incoherent, semi-self-inflicted unfortunate events, featuring 14 bumbling yet hopeful fools, just trying to make it another day. This is the story of Raccoon City.
So you gonna come to my study group?
Study? You're gonna do fucking homework? What's next, man?
There was a disruption earlier in today's football match between the Raccoon Sharks and the Old Court Thunders.
Resident Evil Outbreak was released back in 2003 for the PlayStation 2. Its sequel, simply called Outbreak File 2, followed a year later on the same platform. They're both considered spin-off titles for the franchise, though more recently their events have been weaved back into the series canon. Chronologically, they were released after Resident Evil 0, and would be the last games with the classic style of combat. Unlike its predecessors, the games were designed to be played with 3 other companions. Unfortunately, the servers have since been disconnected, but fortunately, if you're willing to do some bootleg shit, you can still enjoy the titles as intended with an emulator and some patience. I had some issues getting my setup to play nice, so I was left playing single player, either alone or with 2 other AI companions. I can only speculate as to what would happen throwing other humans into the mix. Outbreak plays like a sloppier version of the alternate control scheme featured in Remastered and RE0's remake. Your character simply moves in whatever direction the control stick is pressed, but they have an arc to their turn radius which can make their movement feel a bit clunky. Sharper turns can be made when walking, so mixing up the walking and running is imperative to good traversal. Because your character simply faces whatever direction you tilt the stick, the button command for the 180-degree turn no longer exists. Because the movement feels so similar to its predecessors, veterans will feel tempted to use the command at first, but it's a habit you can easily break. All I'm trying to say is that it's a learning curve, but by no means insurmountable. If you got by in the classic control setup, you can manage the tweaks here no problem. Besides the switch to a more conventional movement scheme, the game continues to use the full 3D environments introduced in Code Veronica. This allows the camera to track the player in ways not previously possible in the series, though modern folk will likely find the lack of camera control with the second analog stick jarring. It's still a fixed camera, just a little more flexible. Because of this, the best way to detect threats is still via the auto-aim function. If your character is standing near an enemy on or off frame, the auto-aim button will face you directly at the target. File 2 does one better in adding the addition of movement during aim. Tangent. The way this work coincidentally fixes enemy encounters with airborne enemies. Originally in File 1, you had two aiming types. You can either raise the firearm in the direction you're facing with the trigger, useful if you're just trying to shoot something to make a getaway, or you can auto-target a nearby enemy with the bumper. Since airborne enemies are amazingly acrobatic in the sky, dancing around you like you're some kind of fat, out-of-shape asshole, the auto-aim almost works against you unless the enemy is flying in a straight line either towards or away from you. If they aren't, then you essentially just aim at nothing as they zigzag in the sky. The best bet was simply using trigger to raise the weapon and manually trying to maneuver the shot. Trying to constantly reset the auto-aim waiting for the optimal flight pattern was a bit of a chore. When you factor in the limited ammo and resources, this made evasion the optimal selection when encountering airborne enemies every single time, even when you're locked in a room with them. File 2 allows your character to move while aiming if both bumpers are pressed. I don't know why exactly, but moving while aiming just constantly resets the auto-aim. Basically, the character will fixate on the target perfectly, so long as they are moving. Whether they're on the floor or in the air, you will keep perfect pinpoint accuracy, making these nightmare encounters almost trivial. It definitely removes the difficulty of aerial enemies, turning them into ammo dispensaries in exchange for safe traversal. Essentially, pay this many bullets to not get pecked in the fucking dickhole. Combat was never the strong point of the series, so I'm not gonna gripe on how trivial it makes them. Any standard enemy is trivial so long as you have 1. Ammo, and 2. Distance. To spare an overly long explanation of the classic combat, the more distance you have, the lower the firepower required to clear the path. And that's if you even want to clear the path. It's Handgun City until the number of zombies goes up or the fucker manages to close the gap on you in some way, because they spawn there, or they're faster and require a more severe response to avoid damage. It's basically your resources balanced against the validity of the threat walking towards you. End tangent. So Outbreak also tweaks the formula by severely restricting the number of items you can carry 7 out of 8 times. If you play as Hong Kong Phooey, you get a magic backpack that lets you carry the normal amount of items for a single player Resident Evil game. This is no doubt to encourage cooperation between you and your misfits Mafia, which probably led to its own set of strengths and weaknesses. Again, I cannot properly assess the experience as intended, being a lone wolf. You can swap items between characters, assist teammates that are down, and aid them with herbs and antidotes when they fuck up. The lower item count is really daunting at first since you're likely gonna opt to carry a firearm and ammo for that firearm. This potentially leaves you with just 2 slots for puzzle solving. AI performance on their assistance with puzzles can somewhat vary. Sometimes, they go and track down significant items, then have the human decency to stick near you when you're in a room that requires them. Sometimes, they go and track down significant items, then have the human jackassery to wander off when you're in a room that requires them. forcing you to hunt them down. Sometimes they just immediately fill their inventory with whatever shiny objects they find first, making them a walking target since they didn't bother to pick up a gun. China Girl's special ability of wearing a backpack makes her an invaluable part for team composition. But since your AI companions are chosen at random, you may get shortchanged on overall potential item slots. Luckily, File 2 fixes this issue and lets you select your desired partners when playing with the computers. Another major change is the inclusion of the virus gauge, which raises many questions narratively for the other 6 assholes running around Raccoon City at this time. There is actually a bad ending if you fail to whip up a cure for yourself.
It's nothing special. Life will end someday. I'm now accepting it marvelously.
The gauge is essentially just a timer slapped over each of the selectable scenarios. Scenarios, pressuring you and your crew to move forward. When the gauge hits 100, your character zombifies and attacks their teammates, a fitting inclusion in a game about zombies. Scattered throughout each scenario is some Adderall you can take to stall the infection temporarily. Each character's clock also ticks at different speeds to help balance out their builds. For example, take this man here. His name is Kevin. He has a dedicated gun slot with an overpowered handgun, high health, as well as good movement speed. No real drawbacks to selecting him. Unless of course you were playing on New Park City and you lose to 2 assholes you've proven to beat repeatedly time and time again. How did we lose, Kevin? Since he has no real drawbacks, the trade-off is a shorter time given on the field. A fair trade. Rounding up our change list, we've got doors you can bust open with enough tackles or bullets if their lock is described as weak. One of our 8 special people has a lockpick for these instances and other small doors with simplistic locks. There's no telegraphing for which pick is effective, so this takes kind of a while.
It might be handy if you were the master of unlocking.
Weapon clips are handled realistically for the first time in the series. For instance, reloading a gun with 6 bullets left in the clip will result with you putting a whole new clip in the gun and hanging on to the one with 6 rounds. The ammo doesn't automatically combine itself. When using rounds, however, you will then reload the clip 1 bullet at a time. It's a small touch, but it hasn't appeared in the game since. On the topic of reloading, it can now be done with the left bumper. You can't freeze time in menu anymore, so if you go and select the combine function manually, you still play out the reloading animation. The simple lock and key method of progression is still the primary means of advancing, but now there are side tasks you can do to improve your ending score, ending you more points to buy more silly stuff. It's an ambitious title, basically Left 4 Dead if it were more focused on puzzles instead of action. There's still plenty of action to be had, however. Unfortunately for the 2 games, the load times in between most rooms slows down the pacing an unfortunate amount. There's a few times where spaces link together without loading, but the case is usually open a door, then wait like 5 to 7 seconds. And boy, you really feel these 5 to 7 seconds. These easily go slower than the normal door sequences and its predecessors. Now I'm a firm believer in using whatever you can to make corrections. In my case it was using joy to key and tying the frame rate button to R3 in order to curb the waiting period. It helps, but it's still a slog to travel between rooms. The game's got its kinks, but the load times are the worst strike against it. File 2 again alleviates this issue slightly, but it can still take 5+ seconds to load into another room without cracking the frame rate. I'm gonna be real here, I didn't want the AI solving my shit for me the first time around, so I pilfered an 100% save for File 1 in order to select Lone Wolf mode right off the bat. This way I got to work through the scenarios and solve them on my own merit, then retroactively observe how the AI functioned when added to the mix. Before we dive into our opening act, let's see what's happening at our narrative starting point here in Raccoon City. The outbreak begins with the rats underground. They contract the virus and begin to spread that shit throughout the city faster than chlamydia in southern Mississippi. One night in Jay's bar, a police officer, a waitress, a security guard, a news reporter, a plumber, a doctor, a researcher, and a black guy whose special ability is being lucky, are caught in the opening moments of Raccoon's unwilling facial. I don't know how each of them contracted the T-virus since the rats haven't fucked with them yet, but they, as well as everybody else in the city, have suddenly contracted the T-virus. Their only concern in the immediate situation is to escape, and so the 8 strangers set aside their differences in order to avoid being served a sour apple smoothie, courtesy of everybody else in town. Scenario 1 has a lot going on in the opening moments. Zombies are clawing at the door and they will break in after a given amount of time to put pressure on your escape. Bob's hanging out on the floor, and you can choose to escort him through the bukkake for additional points. There's a few items strewn about if you have the patience to search instead of immediately trying to bust open the door, or you can just find the key instead. Once through the door, there's a few more puzzles, but the only one required of you is heading up through the next set of stairs, then activating a forklift to make it to the roof. Any extra puzzles you solve will simply yield more points. The setup is very classic Resident Evil, and with zombies coming at you from the back, the area almost feels like one of those escape rooms. You and your friends have to quickly navigate the area, get through locked doors, stop incoming threats, and share the limited resources. On your own, it's kind of an underwhelming set of puzzles, but I can only imagine how fun this concept would be in a group. I know I'm more willing to tolerate silly situations and bullshit when I'm playing with a close group of friends. It changes your entire intake of the content. Especially nowadays with all the folks that like to stream themselves overreacting to shit, it'd be entertaining. I'd watch white guys playing as black guys attempting to cooperate through the various scenarios, see the arguments and antics that unfold. It's fun to overreact to shit. Anywho, the biggest hurdle of the initial area are the puzzles themselves, but their simplistic solutions bring about their own potential issues when applied to a group. Since up to 4 people can participate, there's a few possible combinations of the group composition. Let's say we max out the group and have 4 members working on the team. Scenario 1 is all 4 players are new and have no idea on how to advance. Your level of engagement and group contributions are theoretically equal to the other players here since you're all pretty much clueless. Scenario 2 is that 1 or more of your teammates knows what to do while you're new to the situation. This will likely happen should you decide to jump online for your first playthrough of the game with strangers. The third scenario is that you are simply replaying a level and are paired with 1 or more teammates that don't have a clue on what to do. The final scenario is all players knowing exactly what to do. I haven't played this Resident Evil Online, so I'm gonna cheat here and use my experience from another online Resident Evil game. Now Revelations is more action oriented, but there's one particular raid which requires some light puzzle solving, and this is easily one of the most frustrating or satisfying raids to complete, fully depending on your partner, the bilge block. In scenario 1, where we're both new to the mix, my random partner and I just tended to stick together, not splitting up for any reason despite that being the most optimal thing to do in this instance. It was a while ago when I was new to this, but I remember fumbling through the puzzle. We definitely made it a little more difficult on ourselves than it needed to be. Scenario 2 never happened to me in this game, so I can only speak from the perspective of a player paired with a newbie and a player paired with someone of equal skill. When paired with a newbie, the level becomes frustrating because the person doesn't want to leave your side despite any attempts at directing them.
Go now! Over here! Wait! You the man.
Sometimes they comply, but what I usually found in my many hours of co-op in this game is that newer players tend to stick to you. Like a fucking baby duck. I don't know why, but they do not like to separate. But to be fair, the rest of the co-op mode isn't that puzzle heavy. I'm not going to get too into this particular raid since I'm just trying to use my experience to guess at what might have happened in Outbreak. This scenario doesn't present the opportunity to potentially troll your teammate with steam from the steamed clams, so the worst attribute of the know-nothing player will only be getting left behind. In the scenario where we both know exactly what to do, things can swing a few ways. You can get a complete bro that will work off your position without any form of guidance. They will split up accordingly, wait for you to do your part, so they can do their part, so you can do your part and wrap things up. Taking down the level like a well-oiled speed machine. Sometimes you get the annoying asshole that tries to boss you around spamming commands, not really doing things as efficiently as they could be doing. Maybe you butt heads a little on who should go where. Sometimes the experienced player will just still refuse to split up, but is competent with their weapons. So this can play out a myriad of ways. When we double the number of total participants from 2 to 4, and add the fact that players can be left behind, it likely changes group dynamics. Unlike Revelations, players don't share ancillary items, so they can't solve lock and key puzzles by clever positioning and splitting up. Whoever finds a key either needs to pass it on or use it themselves. With AI, there's multiple copies of some items, but I don't know if this is also true for human co-op. I would guess the most viable strategy here would be assigning roles to characters. 1 or 2 to handle weapons, 1 to hang on to healing items, 1 to carry the puzzle-solving equipment. This dynamic is affected depending on your teammates' willingness to share weapons and health, if they just go picking up everything as they see fit, or if they just roam away from the group entirely. I'm assuming this and the other scenarios have their highs when their teammates are smartly progressing through an area, and their lows when you have some dumbasses and intentional trolls. At its worst, the bilge mission can have a teammate either intentionally or unintentionally halt your progress by flipping a lever. At this scenario's worst, I imagine a teammate taking a key item and playing keep away from the rest of their teammates. Both have room for people to be assholes. Out of my many hours of Revelations, I've only encountered one troll in the bilge, so hopefully most players don't have it in their heads to fuck people over. But I can't say. I can't play this game online. Once you're up to the roof, you're introduced to the concept of destructible barriers. Nothing in the game tells you to shoot the wall, and simply shooting something has never been a solution in classic Resident Evil. So this roadblock probably had a range of different effects on first timers. Shooting it down kicks off an escape timer while you'll be introduced to a jumping mechanic. It's rarely used though. Once you take an elevator and exit the neighboring building, the escape room-like level design transitions to some Nazi zombies. You can create a barricade or just survive an onslaught for a while before the policeman leads you away to another similar scenario of survive this facial. When he's done repeatedly shotgunning a door, he dies.
Use it to burn these bastards! Do it now!
He drops a lighter, which is a slap in the face to a new player carrying a lighter that can be found indoors. You were right in thinking it was an important key item, but you definitely wasted space if you kept it on your person waiting for it to pay off. So you blow them up and swim in the sewer water to escape. This leads you to a small section where you can regroup and catch your breath. Once you're collected and regrouped, you proceed further into the city for the final segment. You can end the stage by assisting the police to blow up multiple zombies, or just say, nah, I wouldn't do that shit if I was you, and run back to the van. This affects the tone of the stage ending and the amount of points you receive, but nothing long term. In terms of multiplayer co-op games, it's definitely more demanding in the thinking aspect for its players despite the action-oriented transition in the end. Nothing is terribly difficult, but it's definitely not a mindless run and gun either. And from here on out, the puzzle aspect of the game will only get more intensive. Once the scenario ends, we find the army setting up the following morning.
Announced that radioactive waste has been leaked throughout Raccoon City. In accordance with U.S. safety regulations, the city has been placed under quarantine, and the army has been sent in to investigate and control the situation.
Unfortunately for me, it's really unclear what order each scenario takes place between files 1 and 2. Only thing I know conclusively is that these 8 assholes meet at Jay's bar on September 24th. File 1 and File 2 also end with entirely different finale events escaping Raccoon City, so I have to assume that the group splits up at some point. We now have 9 remaining scenarios to cover and no official timeline of events, so from here I'm gonna hazard a guess on the order of each scenario. If we're looking for the next event in chronological order out of our remaining 9, we can eliminate both games' finale scenarios since they both definitely occur on October 1st. The city is nuked in both scenarios, which is what concretely gives us this date, so these 2 are out. On File 2's end, the scenarios seem to have a more natural flow save one. Wild Things ends with the survivors taking a train, which leads to them temporarily above ground before heading back into the subway. Both are linked by the use of the trains, these likely happen in close proximity. It's not concrete, it's just a guess. One of the endings of Underbelly has the protags back on the streets, which could potentially lead them to the police station. But on that logic, Hellfire could have also been a lead into the police station. However, even if we assume the ending where the survivors successfully take the train was the only one that occurred, we know from Resident Evil 3 that the train station isn't that far from the police station, so it could have been their next stop. If we go with that, then what we have so far is this. Desperate Times takes place in the Raccoon Police Department where Marvin Branagh is still very much alive. The scenario ends with him critically wounded, barricading himself inside the office, getting us the likely date of September 27th. The next person to find him is Claire, as the wounds begin to take their fatal toll. We know that Jill fucks around in the police station on September 28th, but the room Marvin would ultimately end up in is locked because of reasons. It would be unlikely Marvin survived critically wounded for a full day before meeting with Claire, but it's more unlikely Jill wouldn't come across a single alive cop when it's populated to its fullest. The further back this scenario is placed in the timeline of events, the less likely I am to believe Marvin could hold out in a critical state. Desperate times took place as the police were constantly trying to barricade themselves to hold off the outbreak, so it's possible the reason Jill can't access many areas in the station is because she arrived shortly after things were being barricaded for the final assault. After the last stand, the zombies were free to break things down, resulting in a more explorable station by the time Claire and Leon roll around. With the recent rewriting of history and Resident Evil 2's remaster, Marvin's ending position may not make any more sense. Leon still meets him wounded in the update, but alterations of the story when picking Leon or Claire for this remake are still unclear. RE2 ends on September 30th, resulting in the destruction of Umbrella's secret lab. The below freezing point scenario takes place in the same lab, so we know this has to occur sometime before September 30th. We know from our two ending scenarios that the group logically has to split up at some point in order for both of these to occur. The doctor will take one half of the group to Raccoon University, while the plumber heads the other half to Umbrella's lab. We know how the lab and police station link together, so I'm going to arbitrarily choose Desperate Times as the group's splitting point. I have nothing concrete for this. I'm only basing this on the fact that half the group could have escaped the station in this cutscene, and the other could find their way to the lab in the same manner as Leon and Claire. It's not definitive, but I know how this area links to this one, so I'm gonna go with that. Going with this completely arbitrary pick, this is now what the timeline looks like. We're now left with the Hive, which takes place at Raccoon City Hospital, Flashback, which takes place somewhere in the woods, and Hellfire, which takes place in an apartment complex. We'll aim to place the Hive next, since it occurs in the landmark of Raccoon City Hospital. Unfortunately, this location doesn't do us much good, since we know it's destroyed on October 1st, which means this scenario could be taking place any day between the 24th and the 30th. There's some survivors in the hospital at the time the outbreak crew rolls in, compared to the infestation of hunters by the time Carlos rolls around. This would lead me to believe that this scenario is occurring relatively early in the outbreak, as the city isn't completely dominated by zombies. We know by a statement from Carlos in RE3 that there's pretty much no survivors in the city.
It looks like we're the only ones who survived. We should work together.
We know why there's no survivors. RE3 didn't aim to be a tedious city survivor escort mission. It just aimed to expand the concept of the series to a larger area. The statement's all I got to work with though. If we can take Carlos at his word, this means that any time after September 28th, the city should be devoid of all intelligent life. This directly conflicts with Claire finding Kendo just hanging out in his shop, and probably conflicts in some other instances as well, but these games aren't very well adjusted to one another. So maybe we can just assume the number of survivors is drastically low after September 28th, as opposed to the more crowded instances of survivors working together seen here. Basically, the survivor count is low enough for Carlos to assume there are no survivors. If we use this statement from Carlos, this means the Hive can only occur sometime between the 24th and 27th, where civilian help is still likely to exist. By this logic, the ending of Hellfire would mean it also has to occur sometime between the 24th and 27th. If we're using the train as our link between Wild Things, Underbelly, and Desperate Times, then these events should all be occurring relatively close to one another. It's unlikely the group would sidetrack to a hospital or apartment complex while they're just trying to navigate the train. Not impossible, I just don't see it happening. This places the Hive sometime before Wild Things. The Hive and Hellfire can be very interchangeable in terms of what order they occurred. I again have nothing which would concretely tell me whether or not the Hive or Hellfire took place first. If anything, these events could be happening at the same time for all I know. With these two events coming before Wild Things, however, we now have this. This leaves us with Flashback as our odd man out, taking place in an entirely different locale without any notable Resident Evil landmarks. The name Flashback would imply the scenario occurred before it's given place in the game's sequence. It occurred after Underbelly, which happens after Wild Things. It ends with you just walking into the woods of the Arklay Mountains. From this bootleg map I found from googling map of Raccoon City, the zoo sits closest to the Arklay Mountains, so I'm gonna conclude that Flashback leads directly into Wild Things. It doesn't make any sense why the group would be in the middle of a city one moment and up at the Arklay Mountains next, but this conundrum occurs anywhere you put this scenario. So we'll go with this as my final answer, wrapping everything in. It's definitely not defined in any canon, but this one makes sense to me. Anywho, the Hive pits our survivors in the Raccoon City Hospital. We start things out like so.
I must say that this hospital is not an ideal place to take shelter.
You don't fucking say. This scenario essentially works out like the first half of our previous one. It conforms to an escape room style series of puzzles which culminates in a boss fight. Your team can split up among the various floors and piece together the clues and keys needed to open up more of the space. You need a combination of card keys and passwords, so you're either the one leading the charge or riding the coattails of your teammates' knowledge. The elevator leading to the second base floor changes between a few passwords, so knowledgeable players can't simply skip exploration of the hospital. The password accessing the roof stays the same, likely because nothing of high significance is located there. The usual zombified simpletons will serve as enemy cannon fodder to stand in your way, with dogs making a small appearance on the lower floors. The main threat here will be this unkillable Leechman, who basically functions like a smaller, slower, less threatening Mr. X-type character. He just sort of stalks you as you try to solve puzzles. The only way you can distract him is by leaving blood pouches you find lying around on the floor. Playing this scenario alone makes this otherwise par for the course puzzle segment more annoying than stressful, mainly due to the frequency of his interruptions. Sometimes it takes roughly a minute, sometimes it's a few seconds, sometimes he's just chilling in the room already despite the fact you just ran away from him. When you're with AI or other humans, he'll swap around who he grieves, giving you more breathing room, but his appearance frequency will increase the more your unit is clumped together. Because of the sheer frequency that he stalks you with, it's definitely not a chapter you should lone wolf first, like I did. You have to work in and out of each space fairly quickly to keep him off your back. You can hide in a locker and wait for things to blow over, but it's much faster to just run away and return to the same space a little later. This stage gimmick also adds somewhat of a trade-off for the two scenarios of either playing alone or with companions. If you're alone, you will be grieved a lot by Leechman, but once you kill him with the predetermined method, he's gone for good. If you play with friends, you have more time to think things through, but if one of you dies, that player will take over as Leechman once he's killed off, and that new Leechman cannot be killed. Finding the necessary passwords, card keys, and padlock key culminate in a Leech boss fight susceptible to fire. Or you can just tackle the thing to death if you wanted. Besides that, it's really the same combat strat for most enemies. Fire and keep distance, or time the tackle to avoid damage. The Hellfire scenario is the most puzzle heavy for the first outbreak, second only to the final stage. The goal is getting power to a mechanical ladder to make your exit. Progression wise, it's identical to the previous stage. You and your friends are confined to a single area in an escape room type scenario you can chip away at until you break out. Unlike the last stage, there's no real gimmick here. The puzzles just require a little more thought. It was here where I experienced some confusion as to what items I really needed to carry. Some items you find, like the batteries or firefighter IDs, seem like the sort of thing you need to solve a future puzzle, but in actuality this stuff is kinda worthless. I like the idea that everything you find isn't a significant key item, but if I only have 4 slots to work with, that proposition becomes 100% more unattractive compared to the standard Resident Evil game. As far as the puzzles go, this set actually managed to stop me in my wake for a good minute. These simple block and power panel puzzles are straightforward enough. It's the picture puzzle that I'm on the fence about. You need this big one in a higher floor to determine what switches to press for photographs on the lower floor. This requires you noticing some photos with switches on them in a completely different area. Honestly, they didn't really stand out that much. With other objectives muddying the waters like finding a jewel to move a bookcase, your eyes aren't really focused on the photographs. At the point in the stage where you should be solving this puzzle, your only objective is finding a way to the gated off area to turn on the power. The big picture stands out when you come across it, but looking at this didn't tempt me to look at photographs on the lower floor. Again, they just didn't stand out as observable items. I went for doors, cracked walls, bookcases, and safes. Once you observe one of the switchable photos, the solution is obvious. It's just getting there that may prove to be a little challenging. The boss here is a human liquor hybrid, but the same strategy applies. Shoot it, keep away, and repeat until it's dead. I still don't know how or why everyone ended up in the Arklay Mountains, but this scenario is just a little strange all around. To show off the possibilities, we'll send the girls into the hospital and have our 3 black guys hang out low-key in the woods. It'll be alright. One of them's been to prison. You'll likely just enter the hospital since it seems like the only real option at the time of encounter. Hitting this point in the map will once again initiate the escape room level design style, complete with an immortal waving around an axe. The hospital has been overrun with plant life, so a combo of syringes filled with chemicals and plant-killing shit you can throw will be your main combat tools. Bullets aren't as potent on these enemies. You kill this plant on the roof, which is a part of a network holding up the building itself. The result allows you to shoot the big plant on the bottom floor, which causes the total collapse of the building. Puzzle-wise, it's not as heavy as some of the other scenarios. The things putting pressure on you here are mainly enclosed spaces, an abundance of poison enemies, and the Axeman. Confusion can potentially arise from the abundance of chemical jars you find. They're meant for combat purposes, but you could easily mistake them for critical puzzle-solving items. Hong Kong Phooey's magic bag proves itself to be an important staple in this chapter as well. With the abundance of poison, a designated herb meal is very useful. The key to this scenario and many others thus far is restraint and evasion. Avoiding the little things so you can spend all your ammo on the actual things you need to kill. While the girls destroy a hospital, our black guys remain waiting at the cabin. They took one look at that shit and decided to peace out. Turns out waiting here will kick off an entirely different sequence, one where you can help a little girl lost in the woods or just find a new escape route, because you're not going to go back to prison for interacting with some random stranger's kid. Honestly, this different ending would probably fly over most people's heads since it isn't an easy find. There's nothing really remarkable about playing things out this way, as the only puzzle here revolves around the little girl.
You ever seen a grown man naked?
He said he did it all for love.
If you want to be completely selfish, you can ignore her and head across the bridge to end the chapter right there, with run-of-the-mill enemies being the only thing standing in your way. The clutter makes them annoying, but you can easily swing your way the fuck out of there. Once the group finishes their Kentucky Klondike bar in the woods, our survivors find their way into the Raccoon City Zoo. This is the first proper stage for the second Outbreak file, as the training stage is a repeat of the Outbreak scenario. The escape room concept of File 1 expands to this big and wide open map. The gimmick here being the rampaging bull elephant, which will stalk you throughout the zoo. Splitting up seems to divert its attention for a few moments, but it always seems to show up in this building here so you can catch a glimpse of it terrorizing the corridors, whether it's right behind you or nowhere in sight. Ways to deal with the threat are simply ignoring it since it's really dumb, shooting it with the hunting rifle since it's the only gun that doesn't take a godforsaken amount of ammo to do the job, or trapping it in the parade grounds after you have turned on the power. Turning on the power in the stage when playing by yourself fucking sucks. It requires Mr. Raccoon medals. A lot of them. Because of this, Yoko, yes that is her real name, is highly suggested as a companion here, or better yet, just be Yoko instead of these half-naked assholes. The medals are a good excuse to get you exploring the zoo grounds, and I can only imagine how efficiently the stage can be run with 4 competent players willing to split apart. The openness was a refreshing change of pace to the halls and corridors of the previous game scenarios. Unfortunately for the enemies of the game, this meant that most of them were laughably easy to dodge until the stage confined itself. Resident Evil took place in tight halls and corridors to make the slow-moving zombies a viable threat. Here, however, they're far too easy to avoid without the greater numbers. Like, say, here. The switch to never-ending animal enemies in the form of hyenas and birds attempt to rectify the issue, but they're still easy enemies to handle. The poison status wastes no time introducing itself in the form of bees? The alligator habitat introduces the concept of swimming, and teamwork continues to be a concept escaping our survivors.
Let's move it. Yes. Let's move it. Come on. Come on. Come on.
Yes.
The Mr. Raccoon medal hunt culminates in finding a red and blue emblem when power is restored. Naturally, being obscure items, they serve as keys to escape from the zoo grounds. Because you've killed a female lioness, lioness implies that it's female. So because you killed a lioness, zombie Mufasa shows up and he's like, I'm the king of Pride Rock, and you're like, no you're not, you fucking bitch, and you ride the train. Remember my character on the show is just a Matthew Mackenzie clone? I do. The underbelly scenario may as well just be the Silent Hill 3 train segment. Our survivors once again find themselves in the halls and corridors, making the zombified trains people a somewhat valid threat. No! The goal is getting this train on the move, so you need to fan out in the immediate area. The train requires some unique keys to split itself apart from the malfunctioning section. It also requires power. This stage raised the puzzle difficulty a significant amount with its placement of keys. You need one from the train to snoop around the workspace of... His name is Jim? Ha! You need a passcode for this locker, which has a good handful of combinations. This yields another key which lets you snoop around the basement. You can turn on power before draining the area, but I wouldn't do that shit if I was you. You want to drain the water so you can repair this pipe. An easy feat if you got Yanni the Janitor on your squad, since his special ability is being a handsome welfare check collector. Once you restore power, a train will come crashing in at some point, starting a fire. If you haven't fixed the water system, this train fire results in an environment that speeds up the virus gauge a considerable amount. If you have patched up the pipe prior to the cutscene, you'll get this video of sprinklers in action. Upon boarding the train, a giant bug decides to take you out for dinner.
I'm buying you lunch.
You gotta fight it, kill it, and board the train before it leaves you. One would think the train leaving you would be a fail state, but you can actually keep playing should you fail to catch the train. If you do miss the train, you gotta escape through the tunnels on your own. The key to continue through the locked door for the control tower was conveniently left by the train, so the only struggle here is not missing the pickup and remembering there was a locked door you could not progress through earlier. Desperate Times comes in as this game's Resident Evil 2 homage stage. We see what happens to the RPD a little while before any of our other stars come running around. Marvin looks at a young Rita, tells her he's got 1 day left before his retirement ceremony, then hatches a plan of escape. Being the smallest, she's going to go through a vent system hidden under the statue which accepts the unicorn medal in order to get help. We actually remove the unicorn medal to make way for some other trinkets. It would have made sense to place this medal where you find it in Scenario B, but alas, this doesn't come to B. This scenario basically mimics the opening structure of Resident Evil 2, albeit with some more annoyances. Instead of finding 4 themed keys or 4 fuses, you gotta find 5 stone plates which fit in the metal slot. Gathering these plates requires getting involved in some subplots and hitting the action button on anything that looks remotely searchable. The novelty of seeing an updated version of an old favorite definitely improves the willingness to explore. However, for some reason, you may find that a room was just suddenly filled with toxic gas which has to be expunged with your nifty little gas canisters. There's no rhyme or reason as to how the gas travels. Sometimes it's just there. I guess this may pad out the time spent searching for plates since you basically have to lose some item slots just to hold these canisters. Map-wise, you get the main hall, the precinct, as well as some of the right side of the station. The left is fully barricaded. See, it kinda makes sense. Kinda. You also get the basement area. This area is just pure nostalgia bait, until the new nostalgia bait takes this nostalgia bait over. Completing your stroll down memory lane results in Rita heading for help. You then have the option to continue sweeping for some more supplies before your Alabama hot pot, or just jump right into the fun. This is the only other time Outbreak resorts to this time survival mode besides the initial scenario. I'm honestly a little surprised there weren't more segments of just surviving an onslaught, since the initial scenario made it seem like the game would be constantly switching up its playstyle. Killing X amount of enemies ends the chapter with your escape.
Move! Go, go, go!
No way! I'm not leaving you behind!
And Marvin locking himself down.
I'm not dead yet.
A random half-assed gas, half of the group will hang back with Marvin and make their way into the sewers, and the other half will head towards a brand new location. Below freezing point stars Hong Kong Phooey, but since it's just a lap for Resident Evil 2, I decided to let it star Hunk. Shit's frozen over and some key doors are broken for some reason. The area plays out like a, you guessed it, another escape room scenario from start to finish. Beginning underground and ending on a rising train trapped with a rapist. I wish I could play this one out with human allies because I feel you can run this thing really efficiently. Alone, however, you're clawing your way up floor by floor, searching for the usual round of key items that let you press forward. We get a callback to RE1 with the creation of Vigil, and a callback to RE2 with the fucking valve handle. Fuck that valve handle. Pressing upwards, we can register a fingerprint without any need for a silly password before heading up to the top floor. Having our fingerprint registered will trigger a cutscene where we're captured by a giant moth and poisoned in the process. Fun, right? We break out of the labia and backtrack to the top floor. Once at the top floor, we find a way to heat up a key switch, turn on the heater, grab an important key, and then head to a familiar looking train. A timer kicks off, which brings no tension whatsoever. You just need to be on the train by the time it ticks down to 0. This probably brings a little urgency if the group is split up at this point, but what do I know? I'm a little boy! We gun down the rapist waiting for us at the vacant factory, capping off the scenario. There's more for our misfit mafia to do, but they'll have to make it to Umbrella's not secret lab to do it. Time is running out, and the number of survivors is dwindling.
September 28th, daylight. The monsters have overtaken the city. Somehow, I'm still alive.
The Raccoon City Bukake is at a critical high, and the war with zombies is not ending in humanity's favor. The United States Army is present and available, but have basically left the issues to the city police force and some mercenaries hired by Umbrella. So by all accounts, completely accurate. This all happened for one reason.
No one dared to oppose them, and that lack of strength would ultimately lead to their destruction. I suppose they had to suffer the consequences of their actions, but there would be no forgiveness. If only they had had the courage to fight.
Yeah, preach it! This is definitely one of the more ham-fisted and sappy intros to a Resident Evil game. Resident Evil 3 was released in 1999 for the PlayStation, and has since been ported over to the PC, N64, Dreamcast, GameCube, and Gamecom. It follows Jill Valentine's shenanigans on September 28th as she gives up trying to convince the city of Umbrella's apparent treachery. There has literally been a wolf banging going on for the last 4 days, and a barricade has been established. But hey, at least you can say you tried. Gameplay-wise, Resident Evil 3 makes a few changes from its predecessors. Some that stuck around for a few sequels, and some that were dropped directly after. The 180-degree turn maneuver is introduced here and made a staple of the franchise for subsequent games, in both the classic and modern styles. No longer does the player need to hit a button to go up and down stairs. You simply traverse them like any other portion of level geometry. The dodge mechanic makes its first appearance here to try and compensate for the significant increase in the number of enemies. A feature where you need to make a decision quickly in some set events is introduced. I'm sure there's a name for this. You can now target stage hazards directly as well as enemies themselves with the other trigger. And an ammo crafting system is attempted here, letting you make your own rounds, increasing in potency as you continually make the same type. This is the first game in the franchise to only star one protagonist, as the series usually has you partner with someone else in one form or another, be it directly or in the form of a second story mode. Carlos technically fulfills the role of partner, but the majority of the game, and the only campaign, features Jill. Structure-wise, the game is set up similarly to its two predecessors. There's a main area that needs to be gradually unlocked before progression to a series of short one-off stages. For RE1, this was the mansion, which was followed by the residence, tunnels, and a lab. For RE2, this is the police station, which is followed by the sewers, a factory, and another lab. Here, your main area, which houses the most puzzles and backtracking, is the city. Once you take the train, you get the clock tower, hospital, park, and factory. The game is structured exactly like its predecessors, only on a grander scale. Like the mansion and precinct before it, the city will need completing in a few chunks as sections are locked off with their keys being placed fairly far away. This time around, locked doors aren't really convenient, so keys will come in the form of cranks, batteries, and jewels. Despite being the most open environment in the franchise thus far, things are laid out to keep zombies a viable threat. The indoor hallways have mainly been replaced with alleyways, so your evasion game still has to be approached with caution. Because we're a cool guy with no life, we've got ourselves access to the boutique, so keeping true to form, Jill's gonna be wearing the wackiest outfit I can find. The first thing you gotta do is save Brad. Not because we like him or nothing, but because there's a lighter in the room he's in.
Listen, he's coming for us.
Who's coming for us?
He's after STARS members. There's no escape.
No escape. Okay, Mr. Crazy Pants. With lighter in hand, combined with some oil, we can unlock the first roadblock, allowing us to progress to a familiar area.
Jill!
Hi, Brad! Jeez, you don't look so good. So anyway, our first quick decision event happens when we kill this random zombie for some gun parts. He won't have the gun parts if you're playing on baby mode though. If you fail to dispatch this zombie, he'll stalk you throughout the next immediate sections, so it's always good to get it out of the way. I am a star, thank you. The precinct is far more closed off than when we last visited in the preceding game. I have a guess why, but it still doesn't make a whole lot of sense. The only things we want from here are a blue gem for a future puzzle and a lockpick for the next roadblock. Once these are in our inventory, there's no need to keep searching around. Compared to last time, the number of enemies here is much higher, so failing to grab the shotgun or lack of mastery with the dodge mechanic can cause you some stress here. Hey look! This zombie also had a gun on him. Crazy, right? Once you leave and unlock the door blocking your path in the city, you'll pass by a few more key items to keep on your radar. You can't quite interact with this stuff yet, so let's just push ahead. As you push ahead, there'll be some more pickups, which won't be used until you're ready to leave the city section entirely. You don't quite know it yet at this point, but your main goal in the city is collecting a power cable, mixed oil, and a fuse to fix a train. These items are spread out and hidden behind many a lock. Prior to this, however, you're mainly just progressing to the city. The next thing on our checklist is to meet the man of our dreamies.
All the foxy ladies love my accent. It drives them crazy.
Carlos!
You can either find them in the diner by grabbing the fire hook and interacting with the floor panel, or in this building by opening the fire escape and proceeding upwards. Whichever one you do first, that's where he'll be. Hey, look! This zombie drops some health. How nice. You do the typical 90s bickering before hooking up in the JCPenney parking lot, then you find your next main roadblock. This clock requires 2 gems, one of which you hopefully found in the police station, but the only thing needed to progress from the station was technically just the lockpick, so undoubtedly some players had to backtrack fairly far. This type of design is nothing new, but the size of the city easily outclasses the mansion and precinct on its own. If you don't know what you're doing, and you're not thorough in searching, you can have a fairly rough time tracking down necessary keys. The other gem is simply around the corner in the fire escape building, so once those 2 are set, you can press to the train station. At the train, the main goal for this section is made clear. Get the items needed to repair the train and peace the fuck out. You're given a wrench and some zombies conveniently bust through a door holding a key item. With these 2 things, you have to effectively backtrack through areas already explored, remembering what you saw where. This is easily the most difficult section of the game, requiring you to have mastery over a sizable space. Zombies also like to creep back into the scene after major events, so ammo management and evasion become more important than ever, especially if you're going for those sweet custom guns. The zombies busting the door open allows you to solve the water puzzle earlier on. Placing this emblem yields a battery which should tip you off to backtrack to the elevator you found a ways back. This leads you to the old Transformer puzzle. So you solve it, fuck. So you solve it, fuck. So you solve it, fuck. So you solve it, get defused, then get bukkake'd by all the fucking zombies. Oh hey, how's it going there? If you're not up to immediately backtrack, you can solve a closer set of puzzles utilizing a crank you found in the save room. It's rusted and will break first time you use it, meaning you have to wait until the wrench is in inventory. Once inside, a similar type of puzzle houses the machine oil, which can't be used on its own for the train. It needs some additive before it's usable. While we're doing this, 5 zombies walk towards the shop. I guess this is suddenly a big deal for some reason.
Any objections to my playing hero this time?
Any objections, lady?
Remember.
If you're not keen on that puzzle set first, you can remember a bolted fire hose from way back in your travels. With the wrench provided at the train, you can run all the way back, unscrew the hose, and take it to put out a raging fire. Once it's out, you'll find a crank to a door you passed from when you first started traversing the city. If you're so inclined to backtrack even more, you can pick up some firepower for your arms. You find this pleasant building with the Russian guy doing devious Russian things. Before you call me a racist, let me specify. I don't suspect him of doing something shady because he's Russian. It's because he's Russian that I know he's doing something shady. Watching TV will give you a computer password. This unlocks the door for the oil additive you need to mix with your machine oil. If this is the first puzzle you did on your first go, then this probably just tips you off that you need some actual oil. Because, haha, video game! Grabbing the oil means zombies have to come and fuck your day up. If you haven't guessed by now, I'm bullshitting the combat side of things for this run, because this is playthrough number 5 out of a game I've run multiple times. You'd normally use the environment to your advantage, target legs to have zombies fall over, and utilize your dodge. Out of any classic Resident Evil, I felt far more tactical in combat decisions here besides run, shoot, run, shoot. I definitely didn't shoot to kill the first few goes. When the Mexican pancake ensues, the Russian guy lets out a scream. But he's Russian and obviously the antagonist, so he's probably fine. Collecting the additive was my last objective before heading out, but these puzzles can be done in any order you remember to do them. If getting the wrench told your mind to backtrack to the fire hose, cool. If you decided to use it on the crank first, cool. If you did the battery puzzle first instead, also fine. Play it how you want, not how we want. Bitch. Because, haha, video game! Having all the key items triggers a sub-boss before getting to leave on the train. Where you engage with this depends on this fast-thinking scenario here. You activate a ladder and leave the worm for another time, then continue your warp path for the train you're ready to fix. Hey, look! This business outfit is 20% off at Macy's. So we fix the train, then one of the guys blows himself up to kill one zombie. Kind of a waste if you ask me. Then we're presented with another option. All this does is determine our starting point in the clock tower stage. I just went with my logical response to obstacles in my own life. Help me! Before I keep getting too far ahead, I should mention some of these decisions have third options by simply not doing anything and allowing things to resume normal flow. That's all I really have to say about it. From here on out, the lock and key puzzle will be far more compacted as was true for the game's predecessors. We won't be needing to backtrack insane distances anymore. We believe the clock tower to be an extraction point for the UCBS, so we're going to try and make a signal. Due to the more compact nature of the clock tower, it's definitely a step down in mental difficulty. Poison is introduced here via the giant spiders, but besides that, the network of lock and keys is a far easier one to navigate. The main wall here is remembering to use your combine function for the keys and cogs. Finding your first key allows you to access the top of the tower where a music puzzle houses the key's second half. Up here will also be a spot for a gear. You only have half of a gear as of now, so you gotta go and find out where this combined key goes.
Stars. Bitch, sit your motherfucking ass.
Next is one of the most confusing puzzles, at least to me. There's 3 stones representing the past, present, and future. You just need to set them in the right spot for a gold gear. I don't know the logic behind this one. I read the memo seeing if it had any clues, but I solved this by observation and trial and error, seeing how the ore placement affected each clock. Nabbing the gold gear, you head back to the top, slot that bitch in, and send your signal. You did it, Jill!
We're saved.
Down here! It's finally over. Huh?
Oh, Fuck off, man. This rocket-using cunt jumps down and you have this climactic duel resulting in your infection. As to how Jill evaded the infection when everybody else didn't, I don't know. This is the second mandatory time you're forced to fight this thing. Once you force it to flee, your dreamboat comes to get you back.
What have I done? I'm sorry, Jill. Please, wake up! Jill! Jill!
Our heroine is bruised and beaten badly. Our 8 random survivors are running on a ticking zombie clock. Things aren't looking so good for Raccoon City. And yet, more assholes keep showing up. Resident Evil 2 was released in 1998 for the PlayStation, and has since been ported to the PC, N64, Dreamcast, GameCube, and Gamecom. The game had been worked and reworked from the ground up on several occasions, scrapping characters and ideas, resulting in the final product we know today. Like its predecessor, the game starred 2 protagonists, but unlike its predecessor, it went to greater lengths to differentiate the 2 campaigns, even going so far as to have actions in one scenario affect the other. Really, interactivity between the 2 scenarios was the game's main gimmick. Gameplay-wise, it's nearly identical to its predecessor, meaning it lacks the 180-degree turn, stairs are navigated with the action button, and the design philosophy is nearly a one-to-one copy of the mansion incident with some more bells and whistles. And I mean, way more bells and whistles, with the inclusion of multiple unlockable weapons, costumes, a 4th scenario, as well as an extreme battle mode. I heard from a Zimbabwean man that the scenario's canon orders are Claire A and Leon B, so let's kick things off with Claire Redfield. On the night of September 29th, Claire Redfield just drives into Raccoon City past the military blockade, because she felt like it. She finds that the town has recently been a participant in a BDSM extravaganza, leaving the survivors mindless and insatiable. Luckily, one dorky guy seems to have a head on his shoulders.
You're a cop, right?
Yeah, first day on the job. Great, huh? Name's Leon Kennedy.
Shortly after
There's a gun inside.
Shortly after meeting up, they're split apart by a Taco Bell truck, and they decide to meet up at the police station. This intro segment in the city is simply to get you situated in combat and evasion. Play your cards right on later playthroughs, and you may even find good old Brad from earlier. Once you slink your way into the police station, the game mimics the mansion segment from the first game. Keys with certain themes as well as other objects of interest lie waiting for you to collect and open up the space. I guess the police station has been torn down a little since our last encounter, because Claire easily waltzes her way into the office area, finding Marvin clinging to his last bit of vitality.
What happened?
About 2 months ago, there was this incident involving these zombie-like creatures.
I wonder what we should call them. With his ID in hand, you unlock the other rooms and begin whittling down the police station. Traveling through the left side introduced a brand new enemy type. Kinda sucks. Despite these underwhelming enemies, the zombie count has been kicked up a notch since the mansion incident, further pushing the game towards a more action-oriented approach. The ammo strewn about, as well as the variety of new firearms in the crossbow, Colt SAA, spark shot, submachine gun, and Gatling gun, definitely tempted players to run and gun as opposed to just run. Continuing left sees the collection of 1 of 2 red jewels, as well as the unicorn medal to induce backtracking. Once we get our hands on the first key, we get the first meeting with Leon. For Claire's campaign, this is fine, but this will soon bring about its own issues when transitioning over to the second scenario.
Have you seen a little girl around here?
Don't you trust me?
Upon hitting the library, there's now a few different items we can shoot for, but the main goal is now finding a little girl. To do so, Claire needs to blow up a helicopter blocking the path, something exclusive to the Scenario A campaign. Working towards the goal, Claire gains 2 items which have utility across multiple stages, one being the valve handle, and the other being the lighter. Normally, once a finite item is used, it's automatically discarded from the player's inventory, but these 2 stuck around after their initial uses. For new people, this led to some potentially wasted item slots if they thought they needed the items anytime in the near future. The valve isn't required again until the sewers, and the lighter isn't required again until the factory, though this bit is optional. At this point in time, you've probably got keys and obscure objects piling in your inventory to keep exploration potential at a maximum. You didn't want to waste a valuable slot walking around with a useless handle like a jackass, though I have no doubt this is what happened to some people. The other alternative is discarding the thing in the item box, forcing you to backtrack for it later when you find the next spot which requires it. I like the idea of an item having use across multiple stages, but its telegraphing is piss poor to say the least. Anywho, after watering a plane, the precinct has opened up a good amount. You backtrack finding some immediate bomb components. Getting the C4 leads you to a rapist.
Me?
Your little meeting yields the heart key, allowing more access to the station. The new goal being these stone items to access Chief Iron's secret Scooby-Doo tunnel. 2 stones are found whole, and the third is found in 2 halves. Along the way, the chance to affect the B scenario presents itself with the door shutters. You can use a cord you find to seal off either the east or west side from an influx of zombies, or simply do nothing and let the whole place go to shit. Whichever one you interact with will carry over to the second scenario. Minor but a nice attempt to have both campaigns affect one another. From the basement area, we scared this little girl into a factory segment. She needs to solve a block puzzle because, oh boy, 90s video games sure love those. She gets a club key and decides to give it to the creepy lady if she agrees to leave her alone. With the key in hand, Claire can continue exploring the precinct for stones. But before leaving the stage, she finds this locker and makes another decision affecting Scenario B. She can take all the items in the locker, leaving none for Leon, take one, or just leave everything for a Scenario B power trip. It's a good concept, one that could have been expanded on throughout the whole game. Maybe have a deceptively high amount of ammo and health laid about the station, only to find that Leon has no access to anything Claire picked up, meaning that Scenario A's character has to manage Scenario B's resources in the background as they play through. Maybe a little too consequential for new players, but if you're gonna throw in a gimmick like this, you might as well push the concept as far as you can. With the last key, all the stone segments are now accessible, meaning we can leave the station behind, beginning the trend of shorter, more self-contained puzzle segments right way through to the end. Before it's safe to advance, however, we need to kill that rapist and lose the kid. She runs around the sewer for a bit before getting infected, just like everybody else, despite not coming into contact with any zombies. Anyway, Claire pursues that booty, finding the kid's mom. She tells us her husband's addicted to meth and runs off. New players will likely have to backtrack here if they weren't just walking around with the valve handle like some kind of jackass. Pressing forward is an alligator we can kill or leave for Scenario B to handle. It's extremely easy to kill, so it's unlikely Scenario B will have to deal with this. We find our child companion with the wolf medal, and then grab the eagle medal from a control panel. With these 2 things in hand, we can press on, leaving behind the sewers. We find a train and head to the dead factory. This main hall houses a flare gun which we can use with the lighter. Easy for Leon, who always carries one, but kind of a backtracking mess for Claire unless you know to prep for it. We're ignoring it for this scenario. This segment is even shorter than the previous one. We need only run to another train car and put down a junkie. Arriving at the secret lab, we find several doors that magically unlock themselves since the last group messed around here. Claire's goal is now getting an antidote for this kid, so it's off to the second most complex area. The lab's got its bits and pieces fairly spread out. Once the fuse is in place, Claire needs to gather ingredients for a cure. There's some gas she can turn on which will make the enemies in the area generally weaker, but introduce a poison typing to their nature for Scenario B. Reading the memos scattered around, she can get the password to a computer and finish up a vaccine before running to the exit. As far as complexity goes, it's asking more of the player than the lab from the mansion, but you're unlikely to hit a roadblock here. With the self-destruct sequence activated, I guess you don't want players getting stuck at this point. Before running for home, there's one last bit Claire can interact with here to help Scenario B along. She can scan herself in for a certain door, which will only open if both herself and Leon interact with this object. We'll leave our signature here and head for home. Once you kick off the self-destruct protocol, you won't really have a time limit until you hit the final fight with the druggie. He turns himself into a coked out puppy. You kill it, then you find Leon on the train with the kid wrapping up Scenario A. On the other side of the Taco Bell truck, we see things from Leon's perspective, and how little sense it makes. The game had created several instances of one scenario affecting the other across the campaign. But besides these instances and a few extra areas, Scenario B was effectively Scenario A with remixed item placement. Leon made his way to the precinct from the right side, and upon entering the station found some of the exact same items as his counterpart in Scenario A. For a Generation 5 game, this title was pushing itself very far, but we've now got an 8/9th generation title emerging to retell the story. The gimmick of Resident Evil 2 was 2 separate campaigns that affected each other. This effect was limited in Generation 5, but 3 to 4 generations later, with all the improvements and strides we've made, should come higher standards. Leon, bar the 4 fuses, which replace the 4 stones Claire finds and the C4 she uses, basically gets a hold of the exact same items as Claire, even going so far as solving puzzles she's already solved. I guess the idea was that these two were supposed to be in the station at the same time, but this effect isn't conveyed very well in gameplay. Ideally, the design of the station should be twofold. Puzzles one character solves should be inaccessible to the other character, and ideally the puzzle character A solves should create a new puzzle for character B. This is understandably very difficult design for a 5th generation title. I was gonna suggest the possibility of just having both characters run around the station at the same time for the remaster, either in the style of its classics or modern counterparts. Now that the cards are on the table, it's apparent that having both characters active at once isn't an option, so more care should be placed into ensuring each campaign has an entirely unique set of puzzles. This is Generation 8/9, where shit like this happens. If you have time to make your super cool, look at us with our Oscar-winning facial animations and character-driven story, then you have time to be designing a more complete game which addresses the limitations of the source material. In order to have things make a little more sense for the staggered nature of Scenario A and Scenario B, I'd say extend the initial segment of Scenario B. Have Leon fuck around in the city a little bit longer, at least long enough to where Claire could have feasibly worked through some of her puzzles. From there, he should have his own exclusive to-do list that doesn't include doing the exact same things as Scenario A, but there's a jolly green jackass following you. The guy doesn't even drop cool ammo and shit like the faceless random zombies do sometimes in 3, so there's absolutely zero incentive in confronting him when he appears. Giving proper incentive to facing a more challenging enemy was likely why this asshole dropped cool weapons in the first place. This was also taking a swing at an unfinished product, but dear lord, please do not place that much priority on these cinematic segments. I'm immersed and engaged in this stuff first time through, but RE2 is predicated on replayability, and it's not fun sitting through this crap multiple times. After RE7, I'm almost positive this stuff is going to make a comeback as the annoying unskippable segments which will bog down replays. One of the worst offenders in 7 was right before a fight with the Black Supremacist. You need to get into the garage, but in order to do so, you need to argue with not Marvin Brenna for kind of a while before he gives you a knife. If you fail this fight on harder difficulties, you're back in the save room, and you need to listen to the whole fucking conversation again before getting another shot at retrying the fight. For a franchise which has replayability in its DNA, there should be no cinematic you can't skip. I get it, it looks impressive, but my fucking lord, man. Stop! Anyway, off my soapbox. Leon essentially hits the same notes as Claire in a slightly different way in the station. There's a guy that's gonna chase you and pop in because, haha, video game, you solved a puzzle! So as we basically ran through the station once, you can pretty much gather how it plays this time around. The changes made are the inclusion of sultry, sexy, quadruple agent Yoko's older sister. She's on the hunt for her boyfriend, but Leon's no stranger to home wrecking. Once you've gathered your 4 fuses to Claire's 3 stones and pushed to the sewers, you can actually backtrack and find Claire's solved puzzles. Something I hope will be true for 100% of the puzzles in the future. Zombies will likely burst inside wherever the cord wasn't used, and Leon will be left with Claire's scraps in the locker room. Like the kid prior, Yoko Sr. will solve the exact same black puzzle in order to help Leon make it to the next area, even going so far as finding the exact same key as a child. He enters the sewer in a slightly different fashion, leading to a few unique areas and exclusive puzzles. The sewer plays out like Scenario A, only instead of getting separated from a kid, Leon takes a bullet for Yoko's sis, getting ever closer to making it inside her leggings. Before getting animated up to 11 being the end-all be-all puzzle piece of the series, she's simply a spy after the G-Virus, using this dork to her own ends. As far as companions following you around goes, Yoko Sr. is definitely better to have around than this fucking kid. Relative to Claire, Sherry is slow, and if you pace too far ahead, she just goes into the fetal position like a little bitch. Yoko actually keeps up and assists with combat for the brief moments you're both active at the same time. We'll swipe the wolf and eagle medals like before and take the train, this time using the flare gun since it's convenient to do so. It just reveals a key for a weapon cache later on in the lab. Arriving at Dead Factory, Gumby continues to make himself present and Yoko gets wrecked on the elevator ride down. Leon's continued selflessness whittling her already torn leggings down to mere fabric strips. He's also gotta fight the meth head and scare him off. The train gets stuck, leading to another exclusive area for Scenario B's campaign. This area allows the lab segment to space out its set of puzzles slightly more, increasing the general difficulty of the area. Once in the lab, however, the puzzle set is actually slightly different. Leon's not in a hunt for a cure for Sherry. Instead, he just needs a power room key. He can also visit that secret room if he remembers to scan in his hand. With key in hand, he enters a room and gets assaulted by Sully from Monsters Inc. Other Yoko sacrifices herself, culminating in Leon's romancing skills finally paying off. The self-destruct gets triggered, the player is urged to go back for the kid Claire left. With the elevator as a shortcut, getting the kid and making it back to the getaway cars is entirely different from Claire's route. Honestly, besides the repeat of the main fuse puzzle, the lab is the most ideal scenario of two separate but interlinked campaigns. The two hardly mess around with each other's puzzles here. Once on the getaway car, the gates need to be opened. Mr. Green makes a last-ditch effort to fuck your bitch, but she throws you a gun.
Use this!
When you open the gate, board the train, and see the ending sequence from Scenario A, you think all is well. Except it isn't! A giant vagina comes ready to engulf you. This isn't exactly Leon's fetish, so he dumps all the firepower he has, actually ending the game. Unless you're bone dry on ammo, it's near impossible to fail this fight. On the morning of September 30th, the group makes it out of the tunnels before they're engulfed in flames. They stand facing the sunrise with new resolve and an awesome guitar riff.
Go? Where?
Hey, it's up to us to take out Umbrella.
October 1st, night. I woke up to the sound of falling rain. I can't believe I'm still alive.
The 8 assholes from Jay's bar are nearly succumbing to the virus. Our heroine is succumbing to the virus from her encounter with the stray zombie. The US government has decided Raccoon City is a lost cause and will nuke its entire existence. The day of October 1st was certainly a clusterfuck of desperation as multiple characters had to make their final getaway. Carlos headed from the clock tower to the Raccoon Hospital, which for some reason was in cahoots with Umbrella and actually housed a cure for Jill. This segment basically scrapped all your cool guns and ammo reserves, leaving you with Carlos's basic set. The hunters see their introduction in this segment, but evasion still proved to be an effective option. All the player had to do was solve a simplistic puzzle on the 3rd floor, which was predicated on luck, and a more difficult puzzle on the bottom floor for the vaccine. Upon snagging the vaccine, haha, video game, enemies pop out. The Russian guy also tries to blow you up. So he takes the vaccine back to Jill, with absolutely no roadblocks whatsoever, and then he gets her back on her feet. Because she has a lockpick, she can enter the park, which is slightly less complex than the already simplistic clock tower stage. The area throws its keys about on opposite ends of the map, forcing you to trek back and forwards. The standout of this area are the dirt zombies literally rising from their graves, rounding out our classic zombie thriller movie. After finding the Russian man here, we get our rematch with the Alaskan bullworm. The combat strat remains the same for any other enemy you find, up until the end. Pump ammo into it until a stage hazard makes itself apparent. You then utilize said stage hazard to finish the job. Defeating the worm lets us take our padlock key to a factory stage. Some assholes in our way, so we can either jump to start things off from a different room and keep Russian Man from dying, or assert our dominance and move that bitch the fuck out of the way. Maybe this isn't so far-fetched after all. We find our man on the inside and begin working through a straightforward segment of puzzles. No more complicated than the clock tower. The most difficult puzzle in our path is this water sampling thing, which can take kind of a while. Once that's knocked out, however, we get a trash compactor fight where we need to shoot acid on this guy. We fuck his world up and head back to the factory control room. Meanwhile, at Raccoon University, the Doctor and 3 others find themselves in an imitation of the mansion segment. Puzzle-wise, this is the longest, most complex escape room the group have to work themselves through. The initial series of puzzles is an effort to gain access to the elevator, while the remainder of the stage is getting ingredients for a vaccine. Ideally, you and your team would split up among the different floors and each get a piece of the puzzle to wrap things up as quickly as possible. Alone, however, you need to head to each floor, solving each main puzzle there for a portion of the cure, getting the last one from defeating a tyrant. Alone, this is the stage that will definitely make you feel the pressure of the virus gauge, as any damage you take slightly accelerates your infection. There's an abundance of drugs to help curb the effects, but new players unaware of the puzzle solutions will have their toughest challenge here. The size and make of the stage is open and sprawling, with no particular order that the virus vaccines has to be obtained. The free-flow nature of the stage lends itself very well to the co-op nature of the game. Played by yourself, the stage certainly outclasses the finale events of every classic main series Resident Evil, as its design reflects the initial stages of those games as opposed to the later ones. The type of ending you get here depends on how much of the vaccine you make before running off. If you fail to cure yourself and take a sample for mass production, things will look pretty glum for humanity. I guess the failure of this team assumes the group in Umbrella's lab also failed, but whatever. This stage by itself fully fleshes out the concept of 4 RE Pro tags active at once, giving every member potentially something effective to do on their own. Kind of a shame it took this long to provide this many open options at once. Meanwhile, in Umbrella's lab, things continue taking a more linear turn with a more straightforward sequence of puzzles. There's not as much room to get lost or a reason to split up for this segment. The novelty here is of course using Kermit the Meth Head Frog to punch through hunters. That's before he gets tired of this guy's shit talking. Unfortunately for me, after a segment of interracial violence, I was unable to complete this game with PCSX2, forcing me to track down the conclusion from other gameplay. I opted for a showcase of what the game can be when played with the group. This also shows how things change when played with different pro tags. One thing was apparent from the gameplay, and that was the more linear nature of this finale event. Instead of a main area with branching paths, you make your way to the street so you can head to a building rooftop. This culminates in a fight with this fucker. Once the monster's dead, it's backtracking to a truck so you can watch the city get nuked. Meanwhile, while 4 bros watch from a safe distance, Jill's in the red. She needs to meet with the chopper in order to make a clean getaway. Unfortunately, one final fight stands in her way. It's got a slightly different method to combat as opposed to all the other instances of run and gun. First you push in 4 batteries, charge a giant laser, then run and gun to lure the blob monster in the line of fire. The laser fucks him up, and if you did things fast enough you can shit talk that bitch right till its last breaths.
You want stars? I'll give you stars.
With the missile inbound, Jill narrowly makes her getaway. Meanwhile, the average Joes at the university are confronted with the tyrant one final time. If the player had Daybreak on hand, they could pull the vaccine gun and pump that into it for a quick kill. If they didn't have an extra sample on hand, this would mean sacrificing the one needed for mass production, so really the best ending would need 3 samples created for a player going solo. About the same time as Jill, the 4 make their getaway on the chopper as the big moment ensues.
It's like a funky horror movie, complete with an explosive climax and a hold-on-to-your-seat ending.
Daybreak of October 1st, Raccoon City was in shambles. Resident Evil 2 had taken the initial concept to new heights with its interlinking scenarios and high replay value. Resident Evil 3 took the existing engine and made a few tweaks to the formula of its own, yielding some of the cleanest gameplay in the classic series, bringing staple mechanics which would latch themselves onto every sequel to follow. The Outbreak series faded into a quiet obscurity, despite showing some promise for the concept of a puzzle-heavy co-op game. For whatever reason or another, its two planned sequels would never be completed. For 5th generation titles, 2 and 3 pushed the envelope of what the genre was capable of. Despite their brisk campaign, some attention to detail and incentives to power trip kept people coming back for more. While the main series was flourishing at the time, the same couldn't be said for its 6th gen counterparts set around the same time frame. The hardware was the biggest wall, killing the pace that the game was played. Unfortunate, because some truly inspired concepts sit underneath the surface, such as multiple endings per scenarios, optional puzzles, shared resources, and an emphasis on puzzles over the straight action of its peers. The tale of Raccoon City had been completely told, however. Yeah, just completely told. It was time to move on. With some shiny new hardware on the horizon, Resident Evil would be making a few changes, taking the good, some of the bad, and all of the campy.
You're not from Umbrella either.
No, I'm Claire. I've got to contact Leon and tell him to let my brother know he's being monitored.